Welcome to Engineering Culture, where we discuss how to build a culture through teamwork, accountability, and competitive greatness with thought leaders, that is coaches, superintendents, principals, all of those things. We are Engineering Culture. This time will be Nebraska men's basketball assistant coach Nate Loesner. Coach, thanks for joining me. I appreciate your time and making this work.
Absolutely. Glad to be here today.
We're talking culture. We're talking program building. So let's just start with defining culture. How do you define culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think culture is kind of what you're built on and what you stand for. It's your standards. It's your way of doing things. It's how you handle positive things. It's how you handle negative things. Obviously, when talking about culture within a team, it's about the coaches, the players, the support staff, how everybody, in some ways, it can be looked at as kind of your brand and what you stand for. And sometimes, in poor ones, what you fall for. And with that being said, I think just in general, culture is not a once a day thing or a once a week or once a month. It's an everyday thing. It's an every moment. And it's really the driving force behind any organization, whether it's good or bad.
You've been a part of successful college and NBA teams and been around some very high level players. Building a program is hard to do. A lot of people just think it's kind of like you walk in and boom, there it is. What are keys to kind of building a program in your mind?
Well, I think the best analogy I can use, at least when it comes to culture, is kind of is this concept of vertical alignment. And the cultures or the organizations that I feel like have been most successful, the ones that I've been a part of, the vertical alignment has been there. And what I mean by that is it's not necessarily a top to bottom where everybody has to be in an exact straight line, but to me, it's more of a river. And we want that river to always be flowing in the same direction. And when you talk NBA wise, you're talking about from ownership to management to coaching staff to players, to support staff, to your fans. Everybody's kind of flowing in that same direction, and everybody's pulling in the same direction. Like I said, it doesn't have to be everybody is exactly the same. And actually, a lot of the more successful organizations, there are different personalities. There are different thoughts. There are different maybe beliefs. But at the end of the day, the overall goal keeps everybody in line and flowing in that same direction. I think where culture starts to get splintered is, and this is why I use that river analogy, is when people start to pull outside the banks and they're starting to pull away from the direction that we all want to be swimming in. That's when the fabric of the culture can be damaged and people start pulling in opposite directions. Now everybody is not swimming in the same direction. So this concept to me of vertical alignment, and in the college sense, it's the same thing. Your athletic director and your president and your leadership there. But then ultimately in a college, it's a little bit different where really your head coach especially is driving that culture, and your assistant coaches. And then, like I said, the players to the support staff, to the managers, everybody is in line, and that way the culture is thriving and everybody's pulling in the same direction.
There's different ways of building programs and winning, specifically now with obviously transfer portal and different things. But how do you sustain a culture with all the roster movement and changes? I mean, the roster changes every year now in college basketball, it feels like. How do you sustain kind of the culture? How do you sustain or build a sustainable long-term program?
Well, first and foremost, I think the leadership has to be authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe the person that's driving the culture, the person or the people, the decision makers within that team or organization like I said, need to be authentic and need to be real to who they are. And there becomes this element of some non-negotiables and some things that they believe in and what they strive for. But then I also think there is an element of adaptation that successful leaders and cultures have, that they are able to adjust to the times. They are able to stand the test of time. Because ultimately, any time anybody does something successful, there are people that are going to copy that and try to mold it and manage it. And that's why it's important to also know what you stand for, but also what are you willing to maybe adjust or change without changing the overall fabric. I think, in some way to looking at it, your coaching philosophy, just in talking about playing style or things like that, are never going to change, but your personnel may change. And from year to year, your philosophy stays the same, but if your players change, then there might be a little bit of a difference in the style of play based off of who your personnel are, but you won't overall change it. Same thing offensively or defensively. Your philosophy is usually not going to change. Like if you're an inside out team, you're going to play that way offensively throughout. Now, inside out could be from post up, hitting the post to the perimeter, or if you have a dominant big man. But if you have a dominant guard that can get downhill, that inside out could look at paint touches from your perimeter players getting in the paint and spraying out as well, as just an example. So the overall philosophy of playing inside out doesn't change. The overall culture, the overall belief of how you feel you want to play, and you still stay authentic to your beliefs, but your style may change a little bit and may adapt, but you're still doing the things that you believe in and still holding the course that way.
How important is it, as far as recruiting wise, I guess, off the court? I guess how, being a good human, it certainly helps. And you can kind of tell when guys basically aren't or whatnot, but sometimes you can't during the recruiting process until you maybe get them on campus. How important, I guess, is recruiting just good human beings to a successful program, and two, maybe having a successful culture?
Yeah, I think when it comes to recruiting and how you put together a team, I don't think you need to necessarily all have 13 players, if we're talking 13 scholarship players that are exactly alike.
Right.
And how those parts mix and match are obviously very critical. And I think it's common for us as individuals to always want people that are exactly like us. But at the end of the day, we know that the most successful teams have the ability to accept differences, that can play off of each other's strengths and weaknesses. And then ultimately the sum is greater than the parts. So finding that mix, finding that blend, I think there's an element, and that's why I keep going back to the vertical alignment. I mean, what are you going to allow? What level of mistakes or grace are you going to allow? I mean, we are at the end of the day dealing with 18 to 22 year olds and that are going through a lot of transitions in their life, and not everybody is going to be perfect on day one. Some people, their paths do look different. So I think those are factors that go into it. I think at the end of the day, it'd be great to have, perfect gentlemen and perfect people, and just in dealing with the men's basketball team. But there's things you have to weigh, as well as you have to have players that are good enough to win and good enough to compete. And you're always, I think, as a coaching staff and as a leader, trying to strive for, what are the things that we need basketball wise, but then to your point, what do we also need locker room wise? What are the checks and balances that we need as well? And I think just, spinning off of that, What I've seen is maybe in situations where the character of the individuals, if there's too many of them, then that's hard for the culture to truly come forth where everybody is successful and pulling for each other. But I've also seen cultures and teams that I've been a part of where maybe you have a foundation in place and you take on one or two, maybe higher risk, lower character. And I say that just with a track record or the research that you do in the recruiting. But sometimes when the culture is solid, to your point, you can take on maybe a higher risk, high reward individual. And I've seen some of those players really thrive because the culture is right. So obviously, it's kind of like an apple. If your core is rotten, then the whole apple is bad. But if you have a core to begin with, I think that's where you can start to mix and match and blend and really put together the best team for your situation.
Biggest difference between NBA and college?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I would say is when I brought up that vertical alignment. So if you can imagine when it comes to college recruiting and college roster construction, the head coach and the coaching staff is essentially making those decisions. They're the ones that are out there recruiting. They're the ones evaluating. They are the ones in some ways doing the draft and in some ways doing the free agency. They're making the decisions that way. Whereas in the NBA, you have a front office who is going to sign your players, that is going to construct your roster, that is going to be doing the draft prep, and you're going to have a coaching staff that ultimately coaches the team. So there was a big wave, especially 5 to 10 years ago in the NBA, where guys like Doc Rivers and Tom Thibodeau, and it kind of started with Pop in San Antonio, where the coaches were also the presidents, so they were able to make those final decisions. Because what happens in any situation is the egos come into play. So when I'm talking about the NBA, if the front office sees something in a player and selects them, whether it be via draft or trade or free agency, and the coaching staff either does not get production like the front office or the decision makers may have thought that relationship can sometimes splinter just because now it becomes a situation of, who takes credit and who takes blame. And I think that's why the turnover is so high when it comes to professional sports. In my last 2 years in the Bulls, of the 30 NBA teams, 15 of them changed their head coach in a 2-year span. So 50% of head coaches being turned over in that amount of time. And so it becomes even more critical that the front office and the coaching staff are truly, swimming in the same direction. And that's why I kind of led with that idea of culture, because if the front office is on one trajectory and the coaching staff is on another trajectory, and those aren't on the same planes or the same paths, then you are really setting yourself up for a splintered relationship. Now, with that being said, like I said, it's taking it all back full circle. When it comes to college, you are in charge of your recruiting and roster construction, all that. So ultimately, it tends to fall more at your feet that way.
Biggest challenges, I guess, as far as roster construction is concerned, in college right now?
Well, you hit on it a little bit with the transfer portal and just the changing landscape. It is not impossible, but it's more rare, and it's probably more difficult to grow a player in your program over a 4 or, gosh forbid, a 5-year span. The days of redshirting a kid and having him grow and develop and projecting has become more difficult. I don't want to say impossible, but it's become more difficult and a little bit more uncommon because 18 to 22-year-olds are just like I was, and if you looked at how many kids change majors, for example, as opposed to maybe transferring schools, like those numbers are very high, right? I mean, just think back to all of us when we went into college. We may think we want to go one way, and we change majors right away. I think in some ways, obviously, this ability to change and this, because the rules are set up that it's easier to change, then it's easier to change course. Mm-hmm. So it is a little different in that way where it's easier to transfer up, transfer down. It is maybe not as common to do just stay and stick it out and see how things go. And college basketball and college athletics are tough. Going to college, being away from home is tough. All those things are tough. It's a heavy transition time. So it's just a little bit easier to change. Now, with that being said, I think for myself, and I think the challenge in general is, at least from where I sit, I strive for the most authentic relationship that I can get with a player, whoever it is that chooses to be in our program, knowing that we have to accelerate the learning curve in some ways because we don't know how long we're going to have with an individual, and we can't assume that it's going to be a 4-year guy. So I've, just speaking for myself, there's this element of, I do believe, I love coaching, I love being competitive, but I do want to be, a lot more transformational than transactional. So I strive to plant as many seeds in whatever that time period is to ultimately try and help whatever players come into our program, not only on the court, but off the court, knowing that we don't have a infinite or a definitive time period we're going to have with these individuals.
All right, Coach, thank you very much for your time again. Certainly appreciate it. And I guess good luck.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. We'll see you on the trails.
A Hurrdat Sports Network production.